Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask the Experts. In this session, we'll be tackling the marketing automation platform Marketo. My name is James Ellis and I'm the marketing coordinator here at Couch & Associates. We are a marketing technology company based in Toronto with offices in the US and the UK, and we provide a full suite of services to digitally empower firms. To cover as many questions as possible during the webinar, we group the questions together into topics that we address. So if we don't answer your question directly, please reach out and we can continue the conversation with you. We try to keep things a bit more informal and conversational during these sessions. So if you'd like additional detail on what we discuss, then please let us know. Although we ask for questions during the registration process, this conversation may spark some additional thoughts. So feel free to ask those in the GoToWebinar chat and we'll address them if appropriate. Onto our panel for today. Each of our panelists have been with Couch & Associates for over 6 years with experience and certifications across marketing automation and CRM platforms. We're missing Dan Haidt today, who unfortunately couldn't join us, so I will step in to cover Dan's question. John Alge and James Papke are senior marketing consultants who work with our clients to design and execute solutions, and Abrar Ali is a senior technology manager who leads the development group. You should be able to see today's topics on your screen. First, we have animated GIFs in emails, deliverability best practices, multiple branded landing pages, Salesforce sync errors, and a mixed bag of Marketo tips. So without further ado, let's hand over to John for our first question on animated GIFs in emails.
All right, let's talk about animated GIFs, not GIFs. Well, actually, Couch & Associates doesn't have an official stand on it, but we're definitely leaning towards GIFs over GIFs, but let the age-old conundrum continue. So there is a big shift that we've been seeing in clients' email practices towards using animated GIFs in emails, and it's for a multitude of reasons. The first one I wanted to cover off is the fact that GIFs can entertain and delight, or add a little pizzazz to your emails. And so, in this example here, it's just something that it makes the email a little bit more entertaining for the recipient, will help your email stand out from the crowd. And it's something that it doesn't have to, there doesn't have to be a large part of the image that's animated. In this case, it's just the simple moving of the hand, but it definitely draws your attention and drives your eye path to the action. And so beyond entertaining and delighting, you can also use animated GIFs to educate the audience on a step or a process that you want them to go through, kind of like a how-to in some sense. And so in this example, you can see how the GIF is used to basically take an individual through steps of a process. And so this is a really intuitive way then for people to engage with that content. Instead of it being a list, it goes through. Now, this is actually a good time to call out as one of the caveats, which we'll cover in more detail later, but you do also want to always consider when going on this route that not all email clients are going to load GIFs, so you do need to take that into account with your design. For people who have a client that won't load the GIF, it is going to just be stuck on the first frame of the image. Beyond educating your users as well, another great use case for animated GIFs is to highlight the CTA. And in this example here, you can see how the GIF really draws your attention to the call to action button of go, and that's the real purpose of it. Again, if you weren't if you were in a client that wouldn't load the GIF, of course it would just show with the white triangles without the movement. But this is another great way just to again really control someone's eye path and have them focus in on that call to action of the email. And one of the more common ones that we've been seeing as of late is using GIFs to drive a video preview. So it's not actually playing the video in the email, but it gives them a really quick preview of what they're going to see in the video. And this is something then that again draws their attention to it, likely resulting in a higher click-through rate of the video. And you'll notice here as well that a GIF is really not made up of so many frames as you would an actual video. This is just cutting between several frames to make it look like it's in motion, but not so many that it's like a full video. And that really is where I want to transition to some of the tips and tricks around creating and using GIFs in your email. So we were talking about how the GIF is not necessarily made up of as many frames as a video, and that really is to limit the file size. Again, when people are opening up your email, you don't want them to be stuck on uh, to not, you want them not to be sitting there waiting for the GIF to load. And so that's really where designing the GIF so that it has a limited amount of animation in it. So in the watermelon example with the hand chopping, it was just the hand. It wasn't the whole image that was animated. Also keeping your color palette reduced so that you're not using the entire rainbow of colors in your GIF is another way to limit that file size. But that is really key in creating your GIFs. And actually, this is something I'll call out as well. Most organizations would have their design team create the GIFs in something like Photoshop, where you can have multiple layers within the image file and only animate certain aspects of it. But you can even create GIFs in something like PowerPoint, doing transitions and save your PowerPoint as a GIF. So there are some easy ways for you to do it yourself if you're not engaging a design team. And there's also some online web applications that you can use as well if you're doing a less sophisticated GIF. The other thing, as I called out before, is that when you're designing your GIF, although the number of clients that don't load them are becoming fewer and fewer, there's actually only a few versions of Outlook that don't load GIFs. It still is best practice to design your GIF as though it is going to be stuck on that first frame, and make sure that people who don't get the animation don't miss out on key messaging. And that's why a lot of time when you see GIFs, it is just adding a certain shimmer maybe to an image, or an arrow that's animated, because if somebody doesn't see the animation, it's not going to detract the core message of that email. And of course, with this being tied back to Marketo, you can use GIFs in Marketo. It's as simple as uploading your GIF as an image and dragging and dropping it into your email, and you'll be able to see it animate right within the editor. So if you haven't ventured into the world of animated GIFs, definitely something I would highly recommend. We see, again, the great entertainment value for recipients. It does help to differentiate and also can drive increased conversion rates. With that, back over to you.
You're on mute, James.
Sorry about that. Thank you, John. That topic was definitely right up your alley. Thanks for the heads up, James. Right, so the next topic we're moving on to is deliverability best practices. I'm going to be covering this one for us. So the first point I'm going to speak to is email infrastructure and setup. One quick method to improve your email delivery rates is to incorporate sender policy framework and domain keys identified mail into your DNS settings. This tells recipients that you've authorized Marketo to send emails on your behalf and reduces the chance of emails being marked as spam, as the email address and IP address that the emails being sent from are the same. As recommended settings for the from address, you must use a valid, existing, and working email domain in the from address in all email campaigns. It may be beneficial to configure a subdomain rather than sending directly from your corporate domain. This will ensure issues from your corporate mail stream don't impact your Marketo mail stream and vice versa. There are paid features within Marketo, including having a dedicated IP, which can help improve your deliverability. Doing this just lets you control the reputation of your own IP rather than being pulled in with the larger group of shared IPs that you'd have otherwise. Right, so the second part of deliverability best practices is your database management. You need to use responsible methods to build your lists. It may seem obvious, but do not buy lists and send out mass emails to them. That wrecks your reputation. These emails are often unwelcome and often include spam traps. It takes time to build lists, but it's far more valuable than just buying them. Secondly, send valuable content to targeted groups. Boring or irrelevant content can lead people to mark the emails as spam. So if you're sending, even if you're sending interesting content, but it's not relevant to the person, that's gonna cause deliverability issues after they mark that as spam. And then lastly, only send emails to engaged active prospects. Marketo allows you to programmatically identify and suppress non-responders or unengaged contacts. Once they've been identified, you can change the status to marketing suspended or just completely remove them from active campaigns. You can exclude or suppress prospects based on their bounce type. So you get different categories of bounces. In hard bounces, you get spam blocks. So after that, you won't be able to email that address for 24 hours after you receive a spam block. Category 2 for hard bounces is the email address is simply invalid. For soft bounces, the mailbox can be full, can be a timeout, or it can be a generic bounce. Category 4 is a technical soft bounces. These can be transient failures, admin failures, or the email simply too large. And then category 9 for those, they're just unknown or undetermined by the system. So what you can do is create a smart list for each of these major bounce types to provide insights as to why your emails aren't being delivered. You get
James, I would like to just add in there that durable unsubscribe. It's an interesting addition to Marketo, which some of the other platforms have had this for a while. Is what makes the unsubscribe durable is that you can confidently remove people from your Marketo database and it'll maintain the unsubscribe of a previously deleted record. So I know previously there was a lot of hesitation to remove records from Marketo, and there's stale records kind of sitting in people's databases because they were concerned that if they were re-added, they would be resubscribed inadvertently. So now people can confidently remove records and know that that unsubscribe will persist even through a deletion and a re-add.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, James. And then on to, if you'll change slide for me, thank you. The sender reputation monitoring is the last point under deliverability best practices. Managing your reputation is ongoing, requires consistent monitoring, and you have to follow proper business practices to keep up your reputation. It can be managed natively. Ideally, additional services would be leveraged for this purpose. The goal here is to run predefined sender reputation testing. So onto the additional services, these include 250 OK, which is an enhanced Marketo integration that gives proactive insights to manage sender reputation. There's a particularly useful tool. It optimizes deliverability and improves email-driven return on investment. Then you can also use email testing services for spam and deliverability testing. Lastly, you should have an email address, abuse@yourdomain.com. You should have that configured. It is used to contact you with any complaints. It gives you the opportunity to deal with these complaints immediately and not have them pile up. Right, so that is email deliverability for you. Now I will hand over to multiple branded landing pages. Sorry.
Thanks, James. I can take that on. So Marketo, similar to other marketing automation platforms, essentially allows you to deliver a more personalized experience using a variety of branded URLs, which includes both domains as well as subdomains. Many organizations use one Marketo instance to execute a variety of needs, and differentiating the domain is really critical. For example, a parent organization can have, like, you've got your main Marketo instance, but then each brand within that company or organization will need to have its own branded domain. And commonly you'll see that each brand that's being kind of used within the Marketo instance will have a separate workspace. Organizations also like to use subdomains to differentiate their activities. For example, for Marketo community, Marketo uses uses a subdomain called nation.marketo.com. So it's basically a play off of the top level domain, which we'll get into fairly quickly. James, if you can move to the next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to mention before we get into some of the other stuff here is the fact that you've got your top level domain. So for example, for Marketo, their top level domain is marketo.com, and then you can have subdomains off of the top level domain. So for example, for Marketo, you've got nation.marketo.com, you could have go.marketo, but the important thing to note is that as it pertains to tracking is the fact that cookies are governed by the top level domain. So what that means is that any subdomain off of the top level domain will have access to that cookie and its contents, but any domain, but different top level domains will not be able to view or share that cookie. So in our example on the slide, you can see that the first one is a subdomain, which is events.marketo.com, and it's basically it's been derived from the top level domain marketo.com. But the one below that, which is marketo-events.com, is a totally separate top level domain. So if basically for marketo-events.com, if you were to drop a cookie, events.marketo.com would not have access to it. So it's very important to know about that, because this can directly affect the way that you're tracking and can affect like a universal user experience across the board for your Marketo landing pages. Next slide. So it's fairly simple. If you want to be able to set up either a branded domain or a subdomain, you will have to engage your IT department. What they will have to do essentially is create a CNAME that points to that Marketo domain. On the screen, you can see on the left side, so it's cname.whateveryourcompany.com will be. So for example, in the Marketo example that I used before, the CNAME could be for the subdomain, so it could be nation.marketo.com, and on the right side you've got your account string. So in order to be able to get the account string, you essentially have to log into Marketo, go to your landing pages, copy the account string from there, and then provide that to your IT department. And once the IT department has confirmed that the CNAME now points in the right direction, that can typically take some time depending on whatever your configuration is on your IT side of things. But once that's complete, you can log back into Marketo, go into admin, landing pages, and then you can create a new domain alias, basically. One important thing to note is the fact that are actually creating a landing page and you're trying to point it or rebrand it using one of these domains, the landing page itself is essentially created under all of your domain aliases. So it's not pointing to a specific one, which means that if you have two aliases within your system, for example, nation.marketo.com and go.marketo.com, then the landing page, any landing page that you create will be visible underneath both those two domains. So then you can essentially pick and choose whichever one you want to use in your emails or whatever content it is that you're producing. Another thing before I quickly end this is, thanks James for changing that slide. One of the things we've noticed that people might not be aware of is the fact that your Marketo landing page links can typically end with .html, but it's not imperative or it's not critical for you to use .html. So even if you were to remove that, the page would still resolve in the browser. So when you're using a landing page link in your emails, you can take take .html away, and I think it looks better that way anyway, because .html just adds a fairly technical monotone to the entire to the link. So just a little tip there to end this section. And with that, I'll hand it back to James.
Thank you, bro. All very technical that, but that's why we have you around. All right, then we have James Papke up next. He's going to talk about Salesforce sync errors.
Thanks. Yeah. Abra, that's funny about the .html. We had a client who basically exclusively used the .html because they had no idea that they could drop that for no other reason. Yeah, so in terms of the Salesforce sync errors, so a question come in about how do we diagnose sync errors. So generally what I'll do, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll briefly just touch on how the integration works and steps to troubleshoot it. And this is kind of coming off of the back of some enhancements to the way that you can do that, which I'll touch on in the end. So why it's fairly obvious, but why you need to keep your database syncing well with Salesforce specifically is two things. One would be to reduce the risk of missed opportunities. So say somebody fills out your demo form but doesn't make it to sales because their country had a bad value, or it's to reduce the chance of a negative customer experience. So say, for example, you had somebody who was in an active sales cycle or maybe had an opportunity, but that wasn't reflected in Marketo and you sent them a conflicting sales message. So keeping your data aligned is obviously the what you should be trying to achieve. Quickly, how the sync works is the sync is bi-directional between Salesforce and Marketo for campaigns, contacts, and leads, and unidirectional or in only one direction from Salesforce to Marketo for the rest of the objects. So that means that Marketo can't write to accounts, custom objects, opportunities, although it can create activities actually. So the way that the actual timing works is that Marketo syncs with Salesforce all day. And so each sync takes a short moment to actually run, usually very quickly, and then it waits for 5 minutes and runs that sync again. So there is a stop and go nature to the actual sync. And the vast majority of failed sync calls will actually try again on their own. So some of the common sync errors, one is that the sync is related to sync user permissions. So because the Marketo user is a user in Salesforce, they're bound by whatever restrictions is on that user. So a lot of the time it's related to permissions issues related to the actual Marketo user. The next one is around field value validation. So in Salesforce, there's validation rules that says this specific field requires this specific thing if this other thing. And often Marketo is trying to write into those into the fields with invalid data, and it's those exceptions and those validation rules that are getting hit, because unless there's something set up on those validation rules that says if you're marketing Marketo, then ignore this rule, then it's going to abide by the same rules as everybody else. There's another one, the field type validation. So this is more to do with the initial setup and how you're syncing your fields. But obviously, if you have a, say for example, a numeric field in Marketo and a string or a string in Salesforce or vice versa, your field types just need to be compatible. Something that's really common is a locked row. So locked row means that somebody else is editing the record, or maybe the way that Marketo is writing to it, Marketo is writing to it and maybe a trigger or something else is writing to it at the same time. So if it's related to a literal human clicking edit and editing that record, it'll work the next time it attempts to update that record. But if it's related to maybe a trigger or an Apex class or something like that, then you'll need to work with Salesforce. And I'll skip over Apex limit and campaign setup. For a campaign setup, if you're syncing your Marketo and Salesforce campaigns, then when you're pushing your Salesforce, when you're pushing from Marketo to Salesforce, a campaign member, it's often that you're inputting the wrong name or it has an invalid status. That's why I recommend to create the campaign out of Marketo whenever possible. And if you're not creating the campaign in Marketo, then start typing your campaign and wait for it to populate as a selection. And the same with the status, because then it's doing a check into Salesforce to say, hey, is this retrieve the ones that actually exist and the ones that are applicable. Otherwise, it's very common that you'll copy and paste from somewhere and it won't be the right value. Okay, so with all that, I'll quickly mention that with the October 20 release, there were some really helpful tabs implemented to diagnose these sync errors. So once you go into the admin section, go into Salesforce, and there are two awesome new dashboards, the sync status and sync errors, where in the first you can see a record of all of the syncs that have happened and the success and failures associated to that. And the sync errors is the actual errors that that are detailed. So you can go back and look at what the errors are and how they need to be resolved. Probably a little challenging to digest, but a fun update nonetheless.
Thank you, James. All right, on to the last section, which is our mixed bag of Marketo tips. If you guys don't mind just handing over to each other just to save that bit of time in between.
Awesome. I can take that on, James.
Yeah,
I'll start that off. So the first one, so the native Marketo refer field is not something that can be synced to the CRM natively. Capturing refer URLs tells you that the page a visitor was on before landing on your site. So it's very important. It allows you to attribute visitors to certain web pages, social media accounts, or online marketing campaigns. So the way around that is basically to essentially create a field in your Marketo instance, then add that field to the form as a hidden field, and then the little snippet of JavaScript that you can see on the screen, that's what you have to add to it. And then what's going to happen is that every time a person visits that page or the form, it's going to, the refer value is going to be grabbed from the document.refer and then be passed into your Marketo instance, and then it can be easily synced into your CRM.
All right, next tip here is updating a token value to nothing. So Marketo natively does not let you save a blank token, and there are, a small subset of reasons why this might be valuable. But here you can see the input value. If you use what's in HTML, it's called a comment tag. So if you add a comment tag into the value of the token, then it appears as nothing, like not a space, not any character at all, literally nothing. And this can be valuable in fringe cases.
All right, and to wrap up the mixed bag, I wanted just to talk about scalable email alerts. So oftentimes as part of a campaign, you'll want to send an alert. Commonly, it would be sending that alert to a sales owner, but wanted just to call it a quick tip here if you've got a larger distribution. So what if you need to send a notification to more than just the owner? What about their manager or several regional managers? The best way to do that at a scalable level is to actually create tokens, kind of distribution lists. You can below that would represent groups or sales groups that would be on that distribution list. And when you're setting up your alert in the two other emails, you would just start entering in your token instead, and that way you can manage all of your distribution lists, i.e. tokens, in one location, and you don't have to go into each alert and add unique emails. This will really save you time in management, especially as people come and go from organizations. So with that, I'll pass it over to James Ellis to wrap things up.
Thank you. And with a few seconds to spare, we are wrapping up. Thank you to our panel, James, John, and Abra, for your great insights and helpful tips, as always. Thanks to our audience for joining us. If you wish to revisit any of the topics, this will be made available on demand on our website shortly. You can follow our social channels for that update. If you sent in a question that we didn't answer fully, then please contact us and we'll continue the conversation with you offline. Other than that, look out for the next Ask the Experts episode and have a great rest of your day.
And it's GIF, not GIF. Have a good one, everybody.
Take care, guys. Bye all.